Hey, spooky crew. I hope you are all doing well, staying safe, staying spooky, and finding your way back here for another story that lives in that quiet space between mystery and reality. Today I'm trying something a little different. We're still in our dark, unsettling, and thought-provoking era, but this story isn't just eerie. It's real. It's heartbreaking, and it matters. This is a case many of you already know, one that captured the world's attention and still lingers in people's minds. My hope is that by telling it thoughtfully, we don't just revisit what happened, we understand why it mattered. So take a moment, settle in, and let's talk about the story of Gabby Petito. Before we talk about what happened, we need to talk about who Gabby was. Gabby Petito was born in March of 1999. To her family, she wasn't just a daughter or a sister. She was the heartbeat of the room, the one who brought warmth, softness, and light wherever she went. Friends described her as kind to her core, not performative kindness, not the kind that needs attention, the quiet kind, the kind that notices when someone is uncomfortable, the kind that checks in, the kind that gives without expecting anything back. She had a gentle spirit. She was sensitive, empathetic, and deeply emotional, in a way that made her more human, not weaker. Gabby felt things deeply: joy, sadness, beauty, connection. And because she felt deeply, she cared deeply. She loved art, photography, journaling, nature, sunsets, tiny details most people pass by without a second thought. Gabby didn't just want to see the world, she wanted to understand it. People who knew her said she was creative in a way that felt natural, almost effortless. She had an eye for beauty and a heart that wanted to preserve it. Whether it was through her camera, her writing, or her presence, she made moments feel meaningful. Her family spoke about her as someone who loved hard, who wanted everyone around her to feel safe, valued, and seen. She wasn't chasing status or attention. She was chasing connection. She was someone's daughter, someone's best friend, someone who laughed, dreamed, planned, and believed the world still held something beautiful for her. And that is what makes this story so devastating. Because before Gabby Petito became a headline, before she became a case, before her name echoed across news stations and timelines, she was just a young woman with a kind heart, a creative soul, and a belief that love and adventure would lead her somewhere beautiful. But the road she was traveling would take a very different turn. Gabby's dream was simple in theory: travel, create, and live a life that felt meaningful. In the summer of 2021, she and her fiancé Brian Laundrie packed up a converted white van and set off across the country. National parks, open roads, endless skies. It was the kind of adventure so many people talk about, but never actually do. To the outside world, it looked beautiful. Sunrises in the desert, mountain views, cozy van interiors, smiles framed by wilderness, a couple chasing freedom together. Gabby documented their journey on social media, sharing photos, short videos, and pieces of the life she was building. She was proud of what they were creating, proud of the courage it took to leave comfort behind. But travel like that isn't just about scenery. It's about proximity. Long days, tight spaces, financial pressure, no privacy, no escape. And in a relationship that already carried emotional weight, That kind of closeness can amplify everything. Friends and family would later describe their relationship as complicated. There were moments of love and laughter, but also moments of tension, control, and emotional strain. Those who knew Gabby said she wanted things to work. She believed in fixing what was broken, in choosing peace over conflict, in holding things together even when they were coming apart. And sometimes, when you love like that, you carry more than you should. On the road, far from family, far from friends, far from anything familiar, that emotional imbalance had nowhere to go. There were no separate rooms, no cooling off spaces, just miles of highway and one small van. Arguments became harder to escape. Tension had nowhere to hide. What the world saw online were snapshots, moments frozen in time. But real life happens between the posts, in the silence, in the arguments that don't get filmed, in the tears that never make it onto a highlight reel. By August, cracks in the relationship were no longer invisible. On August 12, 2021, police in Moab, Utah responded to a call about a domestic dispute between Gabby and Brian. A witness reported seeing Brian strike Gabby. When officers pulled them over, the moment felt heavy. Gabby was visibly shaken, crying, apologizing, struggling to speak through her emotions. She blamed herself. Over and over. She said she was anxious, that she had been mean, that she was the problem. It was the kind of response that stops you in your tracks. Not anger, not accusation, just fear, and the need to take responsibility for everything going wrong. Officers ultimately separated them for the night, but filed no charges. They were sent their separate ways with the understanding that it was a one-time incident. And for a moment, it looked like that would be the end of it. But when you look back now, knowing what came next, that traffic stop feels different. Like a warning the world didn't yet know how to read. Because what played out in front of that body camera wasn't just an argument. It was a glimpse into a dynamic where one person carried the emotional burden and believed everything was their fault. And in relationships like that, the most dangerous moments aren't always loud. Sometimes they're quiet. Sometimes they sound like apologies. Sometimes they look like someone shrinking to keep the peace. After that night, the trip continued. Photos were still posted. Smiles still appeared on screen. The van kept moving. But whatever had already begun to unravel was no longer hidden, and the road ahead was growing darker. After the police stop in Moab, the trip continued. The van kept moving. The photos kept being posted. On the surface, it looked like they had pushed past the tension and returned to their journey. But something had changed. Because moments like that don't simply disappear. They linger. They reshape the air between two people. And when you're living in a small van, with nowhere to go and no one else around, there is no space for distance. In the days that followed, Gabby and Brian traveled through Wyoming toward the Grand Teton National Park, a place known for its beauty, wide skies, still water, towering mountains. A place that feels peaceful, almost sacred. It should have been a moment of awe, a pause in the chaos, a reminder of why they started this journey in the first place. But by this point, the emotional weight of the relationship was unmistakable. On August 19th, Gabby was seen at a restaurant in Jackson, Wyoming. Witnesses later said there was visible tension between her and Brian. Voices were raised. The atmosphere felt uncomfortable. Not dramatic, but heavy. It was one of the last times anyone outside their world would see Gabby alive. In the days that followed, communication with her family became strange. Text messages were short, out of character, not written in the way Gabby usually spoke. The warmth was gone. The familiarity felt missing. Then, the messages stopped altogether. For any parent, any loved one, silence is terrifying. But this wasn't just a missed check-in. This was a young woman in the middle of a cross-country trip, suddenly unreachable. Gabby's family grew increasingly worried. Calls went unanswered. Messages went unread. Days passed with no real explanation. And then, something happened that would change everything. On September 1st, 2021, Brian Laundrie returned to his parents' home in Florida. Alone. He arrived in the same van they had left in together, but Gabby was not with him. He did not contact her family. He did not report her missing. He did not offer answers. When Gabby's parents reached out, pleading, asking, begging for information, they were met with silence. It's one of the most haunting parts of this case. Not just what happened, but what didn't. No explanation, no concern, no urgency, just absence. Days passed. On September 11th, Gabby Petito was officially reported missing. And in that moment, this stopped being a private tragedy and became a national one. The story spread rapidly. News outlets picked it up. Social media erupted. People across the world began searching, mapping routes, analyzing photos, retracing timelines. Strangers who had never met Gabby were suddenly invested in her safe return. Her face was everywhere. Her name was spoken in millions of homes. But the truth was already waiting in the wilderness. On September 19th, human remains were discovered in a remote area of Grand Teton National Park. They were identified as Gabby Petito. The cause of death was later ruled a homicide. In one moment, hope gave way to heartbreak. A young woman who had dreamed of freedom, creativity, and a life filled with meaning was gone. And still, there were no answers. Because by then, Brian Laundrie was missing too. He had left his parents' home days earlier. His whereabouts were unknown. A search began through swamps, forests, and reserves. 2 lives, 2 disappearances, one story that refused to make sense. For Gabby's family, there were no more questions about where she was. Only the unbearable reality that she would never come home. And for the rest of the world, the most painful part was knowing that somewhere between the beauty of the mountains and the silence of the road, something had gone terribly wrong. But the story was not yet over. By the time Gabby Petito's remains were found, the world was already watching. Her story had moved from a missing person case to something far larger. News outlets across the country covered every development. Her face was on screens. Her name was in headlines. Millions of people were following the story in real time. But now, there was a new question. One that would dominate everything that followed. Where was Brian Laundrie? After returning home to Florida alone, Brian had disappeared. His parents reported him missing on September 17th, saying he had gone hiking in the Carlton Reserve and never returned. And suddenly, what had already been a tragedy became something else entirely, a nationwide manhunt. Law enforcement launched extensive searches across swamps, wetlands, and wildlife preserves. Helicopters circled overhead. Canine units moved through thick brush. Divers searched flooded areas. Every day, teams combed miles of unforgiving terrain. The landscape itself felt symbolic, dense, silent, and impossible to read. A place where answers could vanish just as easily as a person. At the same time, attention turned to Brian's parents. Why hadn't they spoken? Why hadn't they contacted Gabby's family? Why did it take so long for authorities to be involved? To many watching from the outside, their silence felt chilling. Not just an absence of information, but an absence of urgency, an absence of compassion. For Gabby's parents, that silence was unbearable. They spoke publicly, pleading for answers, for truth, for the simple dignity of knowing what had happened to their daughter. They weren't asking for spectacle. They weren't asking for attention. They were asking for humanity. And in the absence of information, the public stepped in. Social media exploded. TikTok creators analyzed timelines, YouTubers dissected body cam footage, amateur investigators tracked cell phone data, mapped GPS points, and retraced the van's route. Some of it helped, some of it complicated things, and some of it crossed into speculation and intrusion. It was a powerful reminder of what happens when a story becomes bigger than the people inside it. Gabby was no longer just a daughter, a sister, a friend. She had become a symbol for missing persons, for domestic violence awareness, for the stories that don't always get told. But symbols still belong to real families, real grief, real loss. As days turned into weeks, the search for Brian continued. Tips poured in from across the country. Sightings were reported. Every possible lead was investigated. And still, nothing. The silence grew heavier. Then, in October of 2021, something changed. Authorities returned to the Carlton Reserve, this time with Brian's parents present. Areas that had previously been underwater were now accessible. And what they found would close one chapter of this story and open another. Human remains were discovered. They were identified as Brian Laundrie. Alongside him was a backpack, and inside it, a notebook. In that notebook, Brian admitted responsibility for Gabby's death. He described what happened in his own words, claimed it was a mercy killing, claimed it was meant to end her suffering. Investigators did not support that version of events. But with Brian's death, there would be no trial, no courtroom, no public reckoning. For many, that was the most difficult part. No answers under oath, no justice in the way we usually understand it. Only fragments of truth, and a silence that could never be questioned. For Gabby's family, there was no sense of closure. Only the reality that the person responsible would never have to face what he had done. And for the public, there was a complicated mix of relief, anger, grief, and disbelief. The search was over, but the questions remained. How could this have happened? What signs were missed? And how many other stories just like Gabby's are unfolding right now, unseen? Because while the manhunt had ended, the meaning of this case was only beginning to take shape. When the search ended, when the headlines slowed, when the world moved on to the next story, what remained was something far heavier than answers. Because this case did not end with justice in a courtroom. There was no verdict, no testimony, no moment where the truth could be fully spoken. Only loss. For Gabby's family, there was no sense of resolution, only the reality that their daughter, their sister, their best friend, would never walk back through the door. No more phone calls. No more photos sent from the road. No more dreams about the future she was supposed to have. Just memories, and a silence that no parent should ever have to learn to live with. And yet, even in the deepest grief, Gabby's family chose something extraordinary. They created the Gabby Petito Foundation, dedicated to helping locate missing persons and supporting victims of domestic violence. Out of unimaginable loss, they chose purpose. They chose to make sure Gabby's name would not fade into another forgotten headline, that her story would not simply be something people watched, but something people learned from. Because this case was never just about one moment on one road in one park. It was about how easily pain can hide behind beautiful photos, how often emotional abuse is minimized, misunderstood, or overlooked. How many people blame themselves for situations they did not create. Gabby's story forced millions to look closer at the dynamics of relationships that don't leave visible bruises, but leave deep, lasting wounds. It reminded us that not all danger is loud, not all harm is obvious, and not all suffering asks to be seen. Sometimes it sounds like apologies. Sometimes it looks like someone shrinking to keep the peace. Sometimes it hides in silence. It also changed how people look at missing persons cases, especially when the missing person is young, traveling, or documenting their life online. It showed both the power and the danger of public attention, how millions of strangers can rally around one name, and how quickly a person can become a symbol instead of a human being. Gabby became a face for so many who were never seen, and while that visibility helped bring her home, it also revealed how many others are still waiting to be found. Her story raised questions that don't have easy answers. How many warning signs are missed every day? How many people are told they're too sensitive, too emotional, or overreacting? How many are carrying fear in silence because they believe it's their fault? Those are not abstract questions. They belong to real people, in real relationships, right now. And that is why Gabby's story still matters. Gabby's life mattered, not because of how it ended, but because of who she was, and because of what we choose to do with her story now. This is one of those stories that doesn't leave you when the video ends. It stays in the quiet moments, in the pauses, in the questions that don't have simple answers. Because what happened to Gabby Petito isn't just tragic, it's revealing. It shows us how easy it is for pain to hide behind smiles, how often warning signs are misunderstood, how many people learn to carry fear in silence. And that is something none of us should ever be comfortable with. What stays with me the most is not just how her story ended, but how much life she still had ahead of her, how many dreams were still unfolding, how much love she had left to give. She wasn't a headline, she wasn't a case file. She was a young woman who mattered, and she still does. If there is anything this story asks of us, it's this: to listen more closely, to take concern seriously, and to never dismiss someone's fear just because it doesn't look dramatic. Sometimes the most dangerous situations are the ones that sound like apologies and look like someone trying too hard to keep the peace. If this story affected you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or maybe even of yourself, I want you to know that your feelings are valid and you are not alone. And if you believe stories like Gabby's deserve to be told with care and humanity, you can show your support by giving this video a like, It helps keep thoughtful storytelling visible in a space that often moves too fast. I would also truly love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you feel there were moments where things could have changed? And what do you think Gabby's story should teach us moving forward? Your perspective matters, and I read every comment. And if you're new here, and you value stories that are not just spooky, but meaningful, I invite you to subscribe and become part of the spooky crew. We talk about the dark, the strange, and the unsettling, but we never forget the people at the heart of the story. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for listening with your heart, not just your curiosity. Until next time, stay aware, stay kind, and stay spooky.